नाज़रीन, वज़ीर आज़म इमरान खान इस्लामी के स्कॉलर्स या इंटरव्यू अच्छी दे वहाँ की लाइव दिखाता.
It is a great quality in a human being. And I remember my house was being built, and it was the hottest time of the year. And I was just watching this house, the sun was blazing down and the laborers were working. And there was this one guy, young man who was just, his shirt was drenched with sweat. And he never once stopped working, whereas others would sit in the shade for a while, have a glass of water and then come back. So at the end of the day, when he finished, I went in and handed him some money, which would have been a lot of money for him. And he asked me, he said, why are you giving me this money? I said, because, I saw you the way you worked. He said, the work I did, I've been paid for. And please keep your money. So the respect I had for this ordinary laborer was much more than so many rich people I've met in my life, who just do not have this self-respect and this dignity, or ghairat as we call it. And you're absolutely right that, I find people, who have dignity and respect, no matter whether they have money or not, they command respect. You respect them.
It reminds me, I took my sons to Uhud to visit Sayyidina Hamza, and there were very few people there, but there was a man selling candy. He was a little like a Bedouin man, and he was selling candy on a little cart. And so I wanted to get my boys something sweet at the place, and they had 10 riyals. And the candy was only like 2, I think, riyals, and I told the man, keep the change. And he said, no, the candy's only 2 riyals. And I said, no, it's all right, you can keep it. He said, look, I'm not a beggar. This is my job. And it's only 2 riyals. And he refused to take, like, what I was looking at as charity, because of exactly what you're talking about. And that is something I think God loves. It's that dignity that you carry with you. The Prophet ﷺ said in a very interesting tradition for me, I think, he said, the believer, al-mu'minu la yudhillu nafsa, the believer should never humiliate himself. And that gets to what you just said, is that really it's we who humiliate ourselves. Nobody can humiliate you if you have that dignity. They can attempt to take it away from you, but they can't. And that gets back to a question of how you think we can restore this sense of dignity that for a lot of Muslims seems that there's almost a shame, especially in wealthy people. And I think it's something that I find very inspiring in you, is that you're not ashamed of your faith and your tradition, which is quite rare amongst people that have entered into politics. There's almost a reservation in acknowledging the part of faith.
Sheikh Hamza, 2 things. One, that La ilaha illallah, no God but Allah. That in itself gives you dignity. The motto of my party, when I started my party 25 years ago, is Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. You alone I worship, you alone I ask for help. You see, in my opinion, true faith, iman, that in itself gives you dignity. Because just the fact that you don't bow in front of anyone but the one, that is a liberation of a human being. Young people ask me about who do I of richness. You see, for me, someone who is rich is someone whose conscience has no price. You can't buy them. And that's what I mean, this, and you talked about the candy man and I talked about this laborer. People who don't bow in front of anyone, who do not allow their dignity, lose their dignity, whatever happens. They are the ones who command respect. And if I read this book after it's called the Arab Conquest. It's after our Prophet after his death, the way the Arabs spread all over the world, and it's very fascinating if you read that. It was not, they didn't have any technical advantage over all the people they defeated. The Mongolians, for instance, they also had conquered half the world very quickly, but they developed a certain form of warfare. They had these special bows which used to shoot arrows much further than anyone else. They had these special horses and a war technique. But these Arabs had nothing. They were the same Arabs who were insignificant in front of Persian and Byzantine empires. But when you read about it, they were liberated souls. They were fearless. They were fired with a higher imagination. And this is the basis of, if one sports team is very talented, the other sports team has self-esteem and respect, they have pride, they will beat the talented team, and I've seen this more often in my life. And this is really it. The problem when you say about Muslims and rich Muslims and wealthy Muslims, I've seen them lose their pride. I've seen them, become servants of wealth. Their wealth has made them, enslaved them actually, and they stick to their wealth thinking that's everything. So this is unfortunate. In our Muslim world, we have very few leadership in the Muslim world, which actually is truly liberated.
Yeah, okay, leadership, and this is something also really of great interest to me. One of my teachers is Sayyidina Qibr Abbas from Malaysia, who I think is a brilliant philosopher, but he wrote a book called Secularism, which he identified as what he felt was one of the fundamental problems in the Muslim world, is the secularization of the Muslim mentality and this loss of the sense of the sacred. And I think even a lot of people here recognize that a lot of the problems in the world are a result of seeing the world as a commodity, seeing it as something that you simply consume, and there's a type of human arrogance that goes with that. But one of the things that he said, he basically argued that the biggest problem in the Muslim world was a confusion of knowledge. And he said the confusion and error in knowledge created a condition for what he called the loss of adab within the community. And that condition arising out of 1 and 2, the confusion and error in knowledge and then the loss of adab, has led to a rise of leaders who are not qualified for valid leadership of the Muslim community and who not possess the high moral, intellectual, and spiritual standards required for Islamic leadership. So he makes an argument that it's really a confusion of knowledge. And I think one of the things that you and I share is trying to restore knowledge as a basis for, as a starting point, really. And so I know that you have the university that you've been working on in Pakistan, among other amazing things. I mean, I've followed some of your political career, and I think like the Reforestation project is a really interesting project, trying to bring back the trees that have been lost. Ibn Khaldun mentions that when the Arabs went across from across Africa, he said that a squirrel could literally go from Egypt to Morocco without touching the ground because there were so many trees. So we've seen a real loss of that. But I'm curious just how you see the centrality of knowledge and restoring that as part of this restoration of civilizational pride for a community.
You're right about, when you have total divorce from the sacred and you just operate on the material, and which is basically what is happening. And then with the problems because of that, for instance, this big environmental disaster in the world, which is called climate change, is purely because human beings have moved so far away from the sacred And sacred basically means being humane, thinking about others. It means, the saying of a prophet, peace be upon him, that you live for the next world as if you'll die tomorrow, for the next world. So your deeds should be such that if you die tomorrow, you can stand in front of the Almighty and be held accountable. But live in this world as if you will live for 1,000 years. So whatever you're doing right now, you should think the repercussions it will have on humanity for another 1,000 years. So it's one of the greatest statements, about, it just completely envelopes everything about environment, about how we should be treating the way we live on this earth. So that also, I believe this whole environmental movement is sacred. Wherever you think about other human beings, you are, because God, whatever you do for God's, if you want to get close to the Almighty, you have to be humane. So what I find, unfortunately, basically the leadership that comes up through this political system, they just are too divorced from Iman, from tenets of their faith. And so basically they come in for power and then they compromise for staying in power, and power is for personal benefits. And it's all over really. Most of the politicians, very few politicians I find come with a specific objective of looking after humanity. Their main objective is the benefits of power, and most of the developing world, it is coming into power for self-interest, how much money they can make. So unfortunately, there are very few Mandelas, someone who came in for a higher cause, and our great leader, Jinnah, who was the founder of Pakistan, someone like him who, came in and sacrificed himself for this great cause. Which is why politicians are looked down upon in the world, because they say they're coming to help the people and they really help themselves.
This is a huge problem, and I think it's interesting from a spiritual perspective. A lot of the ethical traditions that we have, and not just in the Muslim community, the source of this is arrogance, and because it's the idea that the human being somehow has only responsibility to himself, that he's not responsible to anything above himself. So he in essence makes himself like a god, and that gets to how do we, just in terms of as a community, how do we get out of the conditions that we find ourselves in? Because I think a lot of Muslims, have looked at the Muslim world for some time and seen the type of rulers that exist in the Muslim world, and I think there's so much animosity, unfortunately. So instead of praying for people, because one of the things that traditionally, like in the Imam Tahawi's creed, he says that we have to pray for our leaders, that there's this idea that as you are, so are the people put over you, so that if the people themselves are corrupt, they very often get that type of leadership. So how do we get out of that situation? I mean, I know the trials and tribulations that go with leadership. Like I said, I run a very small college, and the headaches that I have just from that, the lack of sleep, the difficulties that come with that. And so I can't imagine the type of burden that somebody like yourself would have on your shoulders. So what's the light at the end of the tunnel that's not an oncoming train?
Sheikh Hamza, when I started politics, I only came into politics. If I did not have Iman of faith, I would never have come into politics, because I had everything. I mean, I was already a big name in my country, a sports star, and I had, respect, and I had, the money I wanted for my life. I had enough money. So, for me to spend 22 years of my life struggling to, become a prime minister, it made no sense. Why would someone like me who had everything? So the only reason was I believed that I had a responsibility to my society because I was given more than others. You know, the whole test of a human being according to, I think all religions, is that if God gives you, He will test you according to what He's given you in life. The hereafter test, the test when we meet our God, He will test us. What did we do with all the benefits and privileges and His blessings He gave us. So I figured out, and I had already had faith before I came into politics. And I came into politics because I had faith. And because I had faith, I realized that I was so blessed that I had a responsibility to the society. So I wanted to make Pakistan an Islamic welfare state based on the concept of the state of Medina by our Prophet, peace be upon him. And I also, looked at his struggle. The Almighty made him struggle for 13 years. So I figured out that, if he could make his, the person he loved the most to struggle, then, and we were told to follow his way, his sunnah. So that's how I did it. Because I did not think that I was going to make any personal gains or some benefits of power. I came in because I thought we should make Pakistan, make the state on the principles of the state of Medina. And I always believe one thing that, despite all the difficulties and adversaries and disappointments, I believe that, we human beings God has only given us the power to struggle. Whether we succeed or not is not in our hands, as was shown by, the life of our Prophet, because for 13 years he struggled, and a very tough struggle. And then when he did the hijrah to Medina, he didn't know that it would be the beginning of his rise, and even then in Medina for first 5 years it was a real struggle. So therefore, for me it was just a struggle, and I have this ideal that we want to have this country based on two principles. One is it should be a welfare state, a humane state, which takes care of its bottom strata of the society. And secondly, rule of law. The fundamental principle of a civilized society is where you bring the powerful under the law, and which is the biggest problem in the developing countries, because we don't have rule of law. Powerful have one law and the weak are judged by another law. So the jails are all filled by the poor people. The rich crooks never get into jails. So these two concepts are the basis of what my struggle is about for Pakistan.
I don't think that's just a problem in the developing countries, unfortunately. A lot of people that should be in jail in Europe and America are not in jail. So I think that seems to be a major problem. Just in coming to winding it down, I think it seems to me that you've taken on an incredible challenge, and it's very inspiring, and I think I know a lot of Muslims here are inspired by it. One of the most successful communities in the United States is the Pakistani community in diaspora. And in fact, the college that I'm running and right now that I'm in is largely here because of Pakistani immigrants to America. I mean, we've had the real backbone of our support has been from South Asians, from largely Pakistani, but also Indian and Arab and other groups. And the Pakistani community here is a very successful community, and there's a very interesting book. It was somewhat controversial when it came out, but I actually found it very eye-opening. And it was a book by these two Harvard researchers. It was called The Triple Package. I don't know if you ever saw the book, but it looked at the most successful communities in the United States, and one of them was the Pakistani community that they looked at. And they identified 3 qualities of their success. That's what they called the triple package. And the first one was they had a sense of superiority, which I thought was very interesting. And it wasn't so much in an arrogant type of way, but they really saw themselves somehow as exceptional. And they said that view could be a religious exceptionalism, like the Jewish community, like a chosenness, or it could be ethnic or national. But the second quality that they identified was a sense of insecurity, that they had something really to prove. And that it created a kind of tension that forced them to really work harder than the other people because they wanted to show that they were worthy of that exceptional status. And then the third quality that they identified was delayed gratification, that they were able to put off. And that gets back to what you were talking about discipline, because certainly I know that anybody that becomes a world-class athlete delays gratification. They have to, because of the type of discipline and effort it takes. And so those were the 3. But what struck me about that is I really felt that the Quran in some ways was a triple package book. Because on the one hand it says things like, that kuntum khayra ummatin ukhrijat linnas, you're the best community that's come forth for humanity. And then on the other hand it says things like you were created from a vile fluid, that the human being is of earth. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Kullukum min Adam wa Adam min turab." All of you are from Adam, and Adam is from dust. He said, "I was commanded to be humble so that nobody could show arrogance towards another person." And then the third thing was this delayed gratification, which the Quran, in so many verses, tells us to put off for what's coming. That not to take things now. So I feel those 3 things, the restoration of that in your country, I think it seems to me that you yourself display those qualities, and how we can restore that in the greater community seems to be the challenge that we face.
You see, Sheikh Hamza, I feel that in Pakistan, this country has tremendous potential. People are immensely talented, they're quite diverse. We have a very diverse mix of ethnic groups in Pakistan, very talented. Problem is, we haven't, if I look back why we haven't achieved our potential, it's one sentence, rule of law. We have had elite capture. So a society where a certain elite just captures the resources and deprives the majority of proper education, healthcare, justice. And so, if I had to put my finger on it, it's a lack of rule of law is the reason why we haven't achieved our potential. And I actually am convinced that no society can ever achieve its potential if there is not rule of law. Because merit is also associated with rule of law. And if you do not have meritocracy in a society, you have this elite which is spoiled, which is rich, which has captured the resources, which doesn't struggle and strive. They sit on the main positions, they decay. So countries disintegrate because of a decadent elite. People don't decay, it's the elite that decays. And what our Prophet showed in Medina was that, he brought in a very selfless, an elite which looked upon him as a role model. All of them became leaders, and they just lifted the character of the entire nation and the potential, unleashed the potential. Because all of us have tremendous potential, but we have imposed chains on us which stops us from achieving the potential. Our great poet Iqbal, he was our greatest poet of this last century. He came up with the concept of the Shaheen, the eagle. That eagle flies, soars above the rest because it breaks the shackles which keeps others grounded. and all these shackles of materialism, these false gods of power, and all these things that keep us grounded. And basically that's what happened when the Prophet set up the state of Medina. He unleashed the potential of these people who were nothing before, and all became, the leaders of the world. So I believe Pakistan is in the same situation. People have great potential. They go outside Pakistan, they have a level playing field, they excel. But in this country, it's a system does not allow them, as I said, this elite capture, where the education, quality education is only for a smaller, maybe 1%, 1.5%, the rest do not have access to it. And similarly, they don't have opportunities, don't have level playing field. So what I feel is that by two things, and this is the struggle going on right now in Pakistan, but winning this struggle will unleash the potential of this country. And secondly, to lift the people out of poverty. So we've, in the country's history, we've started the greatest welfare plans, programs ever in our history. We are spending most money on the bottom people to sort of raise their levels. So this is basically my ambition, and I feel that if I can just do these two things, lift people out of poverty, create wealth so that you can spread it around, and break the monopoly of this elite, these mafias, I feel this country, I always believed it had great potential.
It's a great vision, and I really pray that you have tawfiq in realizing that. There's a novel that was written here, and I think they made a film out of it, called The Reluctant Fundamentalist, about a Pakistani who had a bad experience in America, and when he ends up going back to Pakistan and being a teacher. But one of the things that he said in a class to his students, that in America they have this thing called the American dream. And then he asked the question of what's the Pakistani dream? And I think you've articulated a very powerful Pakistani dream that, inshallah, I really hope that it's realized in your lifetime, that you see the fruit of the labor. And it seems to me to be a struggle against arrogance and haughtiness. Because people that see themselves as above the law are arrogant people. And so I think pride is definitely that negative, ghurur, is what we're up against, and what we have to fight in ourselves and then in the society around us.
वजीर आज़म इमरान खान मशहूर अमरीकी इस्लामी स्कॉलर शेख हमजा यूसफ के इंटरव्यू ॾेई रहियो हो। संदसि चवण हो त कामयाबियूं ऐं इज़त सिर्फ़ अलाह जी ज़ात ॾींदी आहे, मज़हब जे मामले में कंहिं सां ज़बरदस्ती नथी करे सघिजे। इंटरव्यू दौरान संदसि इहो चवण हो त मूं वटि अमीर माण्हू जो तसवर उहो आहे त पंहिंजे ज़मीर जी सौदेबाज़ी न करे, माल ऐं दौलत इंसान जे अंदरि हुजणु गैरत जो ज़रूरी आहे। नाज़रीन, हीअं न तव्हांजूं ख़बरूं, वधीक ख़बरुनि जा अपडेट्स लाइ ॾिसंदा रहो धरती टीवी।